Hello everyone, Alex here from warnoffkeys.com, and in this video I'm going to be refactoring our project to greatly clean it up. Over time, projects can get a little messy, and this one certainly got away from me for a little bit here, and so we're going to go through and clean this up to be a much cleaner project. The end result will look something like this, where we have a utility folder, we have our schemas folder, our features are dynamically loaded similar to our commands, and then our commands are very similar to how they were. We can actually clean this up a bit further by putting things inside of other folders. Then on top of that, we can actually have dynamic imports. So we are now importing the utility file or utility folder / language instead of using relative paths. And this system is less error prone and easier to work with. So we're going to greatly improve how this project is set up. If you do ever want to refactor a project, which most of you will if you're going to continue to learn programming, I would highly suggest you watch this entire video so you can understand my thought process of going through and actually improving the project setup. So again, this is a slightly different type of tutorial, but hopefully you still find it useful. So if you've been following the series, you know that we have a command system that is going to have a bunch of different commands within files that are automatically loaded. However, if we minimize this and we go into our main directory, we see that there is a lot of different functions that simply have the client argument. These could technically be called features. If I just open up random ones, we're going to likely see this type of concept here. So I'm wanting to move all of those inside their own folder called features. And so similar to what we do with commands, I'm going to loop through every single file within the features folder and then initialize those passing in the client. This also means that we can categorize these different features within different subdirectories to make it even easier for us to maintain and add new features in the future, and also find where a certain feature is, rather than just looking within this giant directory of files right here. So to start things off, I'm going to make a new directory. This one will be called features. And if we look inside of the commands directory, we see something I also want to improve within this video. We see our command base file and our load commands file, and these are kind of like the two main utilities within our command structure. We also see random commands within this directory as well. I'm wanting the features to have a cleaner approach, and then after we have that, we are going to improve the commands base to have a cleaner approach as well. But we'll start with features, where we will have our load features file in the main directory, and then we're going to have a features subdirectory that is going to contain the actual list of features themselves. So with that said, I'm going to make a new file. And for now, I'm just going to be focusing on the structure of the project. I'm not going to be writing the code yet. Once we get everything set up, then I'll go through and do that. But this is going to be called load-features.js. And then I'm going to close this file. Within this directory, I'm going to make another folder called features, and this is where all the features will go. So I'm going to emulate this within our commands directory. So here I'm going to make another directory called commands, and then I'm going to actually move all of our commands inside of there. So all of these folders can be dragged into our commands folder. So moderation, we got our prefix, roles, warn, we got add, command base will stay, but delete channel and all the actual commands will be dragged into here. Load commands will also stay. We got settings, and finally ticket. Now if I minimize this directory, and if I go through and save and close all of these files, we can then minimize all of our directories at once with this button right here in VS Code. And now our commands folder looks a lot more clean. We still want to organize some of this stuff further, but we'll get to that soon. But here we see our command base file and our load commands file, which are the two main utilities that are going to actually go through and load all the commands. So real quick, let's see if this still works. Let's go inside of my console and I will run node index.js. And we get this error here. So scrolling up, it says cannot find module ... economy. And this is coming from commands economy balance.js. So here we have our commands economy balance.js. And so this is trying to look for 2 directories back for the economy file when it's now 3 directories back. So we're going to have a lot of errors like this, and I'm not going to go through and manually fix them when it comes to relative paths like this. We're actually going to use a new project, or a new package rather, that is going to help us improve this greatly. So if I actually open up economy, if I scroll down and move economy into a new tab here, we see that currently this function is empty, but it is set up to be an actual feature. And so in this exact case, instead of doing a relative path where if the file changes that could break, we're just going to say @features/economy. And so we're going to be able to do this for any type of different collection or category of files we have. For example, if you've been following along, you know that we here are using Mongo, and so we have a lot of schemas. If I were to import a schema, it would just be @schemas. And then this will actually import the economy schema, even though there is none that is named economy exactly like that, but that's just an example. For commands, it would be @commands/economy. And if there were subdirectories, like let's say that hypothetically there was an economy subdirectory, similar to how there actually is, I can then say @commands/economy and then /economy for the actual file name. Now in this case, I know that we are inside the balance, but let's say we were outside this file, we wanted to import balance. We would then be able to do it like this, @command/economy, which means that we're going to this commands directory, we're going to the economy directory, and we're accessing balance right there. And so this is a much easier way to actually maintain our imports rather than relative paths, which could change depending on whenever the file is moved. So this is something we're going to focus on once we move all our files around so we can go through and fix it once. So I'm going to actually undo all the changes I just made so we do have this relative path. So we're not going to be able to actually test our bot until we're done with all the refactoring because of all the broken paths, but we will eventually get to a working stage where the bot will actually work and we'll have a much cleaner file structure. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and open up my features folder right here. I'm wanting to move all the files within the main directory that have a function like this, where we're exporting a function that has a single client object as an argument. I want you to move all of those inside of the features subdirectory. So advanced polls would qualify because it does export a function that has the client argument. So I'm going to simply just drag this into the features. If we look at anti-add, this is the same concept. I can then move that here. We have access to command right here. I'm actually going to keep this here. There is some code such as the mute handler that does use this outdated command handler. I'm going to keep this as is right here, and we're going to deal with that later on. So if we move forward, we see economy. Again, this doesn't technically have any code right here, but it is intended to set up as an actual feature. So I will move it inside of the features file as well. We go to eval, and this is set up the same way. So I can move this in here. Going into first message, this is set up as a utility, which I guess the command file could technically be considered a utility as well. And so with that said, we can actually make a utilities folder. So I'm going to make a new folder called util, and I can actually move some of the stuff inside of there. Now again, let's say that we wanted to import our command here, which we're actually doing within our mute file right here. We're not just going to use a relative path because this right now just broke because the command file is no longer inside of the same directory as mute.js. So we would actually use @util/command. And so this is one way that we're going to improve the project like I just explained, but we'll get to that soon. That's just another example. So now we can see our first message can be moved into util. We see our main file here. We're going to keep this in the base directory, of course. Invite notifications is a feature, so that can be dragged inside of the features subdirectory. So invite notifications can go right up here. We then see lang.json, and this is something that probably should stay within the main directory. And then we also see language.json, and scrolling down, we see that we are exporting a function that is not technically what we consider a feature. This is going to be more of a utility, so we can actually move language.js into util. Under levels, we see that this is another feature type file, so we're going to move that inside the features. And scrolling back down, we see member count is yet another feature file. I'm going to move member count into the features as well. We see message counter, which is the same concept here, yet another feature. So that will be moved into here. We see mod logs, which is another feature. This will be moved into here. Now, once we have everything in here, we can actually organize this into a few different subdirectories to make it even easier to navigate through and find what we're looking for. So moving forward, we have Mongo.js. Now this is kind of like a utility. So this can be moved into the util folder. We have mute.js, which is a feature. I'm going to move this into the features directory. We then have poll, which is a feature as well. So that can be moved inside of here again. And then we have private message, which is more of a utility here. So private message can be moved inside of the util folder. We then have Redis, which allows us to connect to our Redis server. This is again a utility, so that can be moved into there. We can then go into role claim, and this is a feature. We can then move this up into here. Going back down, we have scaling channels. This is another feature. This can go right in there. We're almost done here. We have send message, which is a utility that can go inside the util folder. And then we have welcome.js, which is a feature. So that can go inside of the features folder. Now, if I were to minimize all of our folders here with this icon right here, we see that our structure is now much cleaner. All of our features are within our features folder. Of course, our commands are still within the command folder. Our utilities are within the utility folder. And just like before, our schemas are within the schema folder. Now our root directory is much cleaner. We just have some primary files here. We have our configuration, which holds our token. We have our main file, we have our language, and our package.json. This is a much cleaner setup, but of course now the bot is completely broken, so we have to actually go through and fix that. So opening up my console, I can import a package that we can use to actually allow us to have the modularized imports like I was showing. So we can use like @util, @schemas, things like that. So we are avoiding relative paths with the ... type syntax, which is error prone and annoying to work with. So to do that, we can simply run npm install and then module-alias. Now to actually use this, we have to go inside of our main file and we can minimize the console. Now the very first line of our main file here should be actually requiring this. So we don't actually have to require this into a variable or a constant. We can just simply require this. So we can say require and then module-alias/register. Now if we save this, this project or this package rather is now imported, but we have to actually configure which directories are going to have which alias. And so we can do that within our package.json file. If I open this, we have all the information here. Now after the dependencies, so if I click on this opening curly brace, it will highlight the ending one. So I can then click there. We want to add a comma, and then afterwards, we want to add a new item. So I'm going to have a string here, and it's going to be underscore module aliases. And this is going to be an object. Now within here, you're going to add in whatever aliases you want. That'll be a relative path from this package.json file. So for example, if we're wanting to access lang.json, we might want to import that with @root/lang.json. Same thing with the config file. This is a file that's imported in multiple different places throughout our project. We don't want to use the ... to go back to the root file, or the root folder rather. We want to just simply say @root/config.json and to know that it's going to work. So we're going to start off with a root directory. So we can say @root, and this will be simply dot, which represents the current directory that the code is inside of, which is our root directory. Now after that, an obvious one will be our schemas. And so I can use @schemas, and this will go inside of our schemas folder. Then we can use our utilities here. So we can easily import these. So I can say @util and then ./util. Now going into features, I don't want to get this primary features folder right here. I want to get the nested folder right here. The reason for that is typically I'm going to want to try and import all of these at some point. And so I want to be able to access these in an easier way. If I want to access this single file compared to these mini files, then I can just simply do /features from the root directory and then access the file. Same concept with the commands. The commands directory, or the command alias rather, that we're going to be typing in, is going to reference the nested commands directory. That way, if we need to access any of these mini files, we can easily do that. But if we want to access one of the two files here, we can just simply use the root directory /commands/command base, for example. So with that said, we can now add in our features. So @features will be ./features/features for the nested folder. Same concept for the commands. So @commands, ./commands/commands. There we go. So now we've defined all of our modules, and now we can actually go through and use these. So minimizing everything and closing this, we can see that some of these things are importing a local file. Now, even though index.js and config.json are likely always going to be within the same directory, we don't want to just assume that for the entire history of this project, or the entire future of this project, I should say. So we actually want to import this using the root alias, so @root/config.json. From this point on, we want to always avoid relative paths using ./ or ./ or anything like that. We want to always try and use the alias paths that we just set up whenever possible. Now here we're trying to load language, and if we look inside of our utility, that's where our language file is. So I can then use @util/language, and that's going to then point into the util folder. Now we have load commands and command base, which are going to be these two files here. So this will actually still work because these files technically didn't change their directories. But again, we're using a relative path, which is something we want to avoid. So we can simply say @root, and then I can say @root right here. So mod logs right here. This is likely inside of features, I believe. Here we see mod log. So I can do @features, and that's going to then access this nested features directory. And so this is going to correctly import this. So scrolling down, everything else seems fine. We're only need to go through and fix all of the imports. So I can save this. I can collapse all the folders. Moving forward, we do not have any other JS files. These are just configuration files, and so we don't have to import anything here. Now let's work our way up. We have our utility here, which doesn't have too many files in it. And inside of command, we're trying to import config.json. Now this technically will still work because we are only one folder away from the root directory, which is where config.json is located. And so this is going to go back one directory. But of course, like we've been doing, we want to actually use the aliases just in case config.json changes, or just in case the command.js file changes, which is more likely. So I can then save and close this. Here we're not actually importing anything. Language, we are importing Mongo, so we can use @util. And then here under schema, I can use @schemas. Now here, we're trying to access a lang.json. We know that that is at the root, so @root. And I think you guys get the idea here. So I'm actually going to pause the video. I'm going to go through and fix up all of the imports, but there might be some other things we're going to do after I go through and change all the imports, so be sure to keep watching. Okay, so I just got done going through and refactoring all the actual imports. Now we're almost done here. If we actually go into our console and we run the bot with node index.js, we see that our bot actually starts up correctly. It registers all the commands as expected, and we don't see any errors that it cannot find any files because our imports are now correctly defined. However, all of our features do not exist at the moment because if we look inside of our features file, or features folder rather, load features is actually empty. So now the last thing we're going to do in this video is we're going to make it so all of our features are dynamically imported through loadfeatures.js. I can go ahead and stop my bot and close my console. And I'm actually going to open up the load commands file, which is going to have a very similar syntax. So we're going to have a very similar setup here, so we can actually copy this entire code and then paste it inside of the load features file. So closing our load commands, we can go through and we're going to make a couple changes. Of course, the base file name is going to be something that we actually are importing, so we can actually use the command base here. We don't actually need that. So the base file and the command base we can go ahead and delete. Now, the new line 5 is going to be a commands array. Right now, we don't need this. We're going to re-implement something similar to this, but different in the future when we go to have the different module systems, like I was mentioning, where you can enable and disable features. But for now, we're just going to clean up the code and just get rid of it. We also see that we're returning commands, so we can go ahead and get rid of that. So we see our function here is called read commands. If I click on this and I press F2 within VS Code, I can then rename this function, and every single time that the function is used, such as line 10 right here and line 21 right here, it'll rename those as well. So to rename this, I can just call this read features, and we see that it is renamed on line 10 and line 21 automatically for us. So now going through the code, a lot of this stuff is fine to use. Here we have this if statement on line 11. The else if file is not exactly equal to base file. Base file no longer exists, so we can get rid of this first part of the if statement, including the double ampersands. So we can get rid of that. And now we just need to make sure that load features isn't the file. So instead of load commands, I'm going to replace this with load features. Then I can save this. And then here we see that we're accessing command base. So I don't actually want to do that. And we're also pushing the command information into the actual commands array, which no longer exists. So we can delete that line. And then we can also get rid of this entire if statement. Now at this point, the option variable is incorrectly named. This isn't going to be an option because that's for the different command options. So I'm going to rename this and call this feature. So here I can add a console log. So console.log. I can say enabling feature, and then I'm actually going to move this inside of a template literal. I'm going to add quotes, and then I'm going to insert in the actual file name. And then afterwards, I'm going to then call that. So feature right here is going to be wherever we are importing it from. So this is a standard import that we have been using. So if I go inside the features directory and I open up advanced pulls, for example, it's going to be exporting this function right here. And so when we import it, which we are doing right here, it's going to contain that function. So we can then call that function and pass in our client. So I can call feature and pass in client. Now it doesn't actually matter if this is not technically called advanced polls, because of course that's just the name of the variable. The actual value that the variable holds is whatever is required here, which in this case, if we're looping through and we see advanced polls, it'll be that. Afterwards, it'll likely be anti-add, economy, etc. Now, real quick, this eval command, if you remember the video on it, I was very careful about how this is used. And so because we are automatically enabling everything by default now, I'm actually going to completely delete this from the project. This is a security risk. It is interesting to actually learn how this works, but of course, I do not want to keep this code inside of my project if it's going to be enabled by default. So I can simply just delete this file, and then I can save load features. Now going inside of our main file here under index, we want to actually import this similar to how we are loading the commands. So after all of this, I can say const load features equals require. I'm going to access the root directory /features/load-features. Now we can actually call this. So after load commands, I'm going to make a new line and I'm going to say load features and I'm going to pass in the client. I can then save this and let's try it out. Going to my console, I can run it with node index.js and we get an exception. So let's take a look. So it says cannot read properties set name of undefined, and this is under features member count line 6. So let's take a look at that. So here we have member count line 6, which is channel.setName members. So we might have some code that is going to have a problem because this channel likely doesn't exist anymore. So with that said, this is actually going to improve our project even further because we're going to add in the proper error handling that I might have missed in previous videos. So for example, here, the channel is going to be undefined or null or some type of falsy value if the channel doesn't exist. So we can just simply say if channel. This is going to make sure that the channel does exist before we actually try and use it. So if I save this, this should fix this exact problem. And let's see if we run into any other problems. Okay, so we do right here. So this seems like a problem with connecting to Redis. I'm not sure if this Redis server even exists. And I believe that Redis was only used within the mute command, which uses the basic command handler. So I am planning on redoing the mute command using the advanced command handler. And so with that said, I can actually go ahead and delete this for now. And now if I restart the bot, that should solve the problem, I think. Okay, so our bot didn't fully crash. It still started up. However, we do get a new error here. So that did solve the previous problem. Now let's take a look at this. So Discord API error unknown channel. So unfortunately, if we look through the lines of code, none of these are actually our local files. These are usually within node modules right here. And so this error doesn't give us too much information on what the problem is. So we don't exactly know where the problem is exactly. Now, we could assume that it's going to be the latest thing that happens right here. Like for example, it says enabling feature welcome.js and then the error occurs. I don't think that's the case though, because if I go into welcome.js and at the very start, if I just simply return, which means the entire feature will not work. If I run this again, we still get the same error. And so this is one of those annoying problems where I'm actually going to have to go through and manually check each file to see what it is. But I'm going to pause the video and save you guys the time so I can let you know what it is. Okay, so luckily it was only the third file I checked, which is role claim. So now that I have returned on role claim, we see that the error is no longer there. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of my return and get rid of my return on welcome.js as well. Now, if I restart this, those two features should be enabled again. However, the role claim is still disabled essentially because we are simply returning immediately. And so the error is gone, which is confirming that that error is coming from role claim. So if I scroll up, we can actually take a look at this error and see if we can fix it. It says Discord API error unknown channel. So here I'm actually getting access to a channel ID. Let me minimize my console. And I can also get rid of this return so we can read our code in an easier way. So I'm going to look for the channel ID and see where this is used. So scrolling through, it seems like we are passing in the channel ID into first message. So if I actually go into my utility folder and I open that, we see that we have an ID right here. Now we're getting access to a channel, but we're never checking to see if that channel actually exists. So I could say if not channel, return. I can also add a console.log here saying unknown channel, and then I'm just going to append the actual ID. Then I can save this. I can save my role claim, which is not immediately returned. So this should be enabled again. And then I can try running this and we should see if we get that message saying that there's an unknown channel for the ID. Okay, so we don't get that message, which means that wasn't the problem. However, if I comment this line out and then I run this, we no longer get the error. That means that it is something within the first message file, but we just did not do it correctly. So let's open this up and let's take another look. So my first instinct is to identify what this channel actually is. So I'm going to simply add a console log, and we're going to take a look at what the channel is. So I can save this and I can restart the bot. I also forgot to uncomment this, so the code's never ran. So now we can restart one more time. Okay, so we never actually see our console log, which means the error is happening on line 10. I'm really not sure why it's not displaying a line number there. Sometimes that happens with errors, but after reviewing this line, I think there's a better way we can do this. So I can say client.channels.cache.get, and this should actually have the same result. We then see channel is undefined, and that's this console log right here. And then it says unknown channel. And so now this is correctly returning that this channel doesn't exist. So now that we have that, I can actually go through and delete this console log. We'll keep the unknown channel just because it allows us to easily debug what the problem is. I can then save and close this. And I believe that our entire bot is now working as it just was. However, now we have a much cleaner file structure. And so this is a slightly different tutorial. Obviously, I'm not showing a new feature. I'm actually going through and cleaning up our previous code. And so refactoring projects over time can be useful. Ideally, you should be thinking about how your project structure should end up being in the future before you start your project. That's just something I overlooked through this series. And so from now on, I'm going to be using a similar structure to this. This isn't necessarily the perfect way to structure this project, but is definitely better and is definitely going to be suitable for our needs moving forward. Thanks for watching this Discord.js tutorial. If you want to learn more about Discord.js, consider clicking on the playlist you see on your screen now. If you need help, feel free to leave a comment or ask in the Worn Off Keys Discord, which can be found in the video description.